Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Eliot.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about Monty Hall campaigns and Mini-Haul campaigns. The types of campaigns where the DM either just gives out loot like it is candy, or the opposite of that, the Mini-Haul, where the DM gives out loot like you're standing in the bread line in 20s Russia.
Clayton, before we go any further, can you explain who the fuck Monty Hall is?
Yeah, for our younger listeners, I can imagine you have no idea who Monty Hall is. I wonder if you guys even know who Monty Hall is.
Only because I looked it up one time.
So, back in the 70s, Monty Hall was a game show host, and this, for Let's Make a Deal. There is a current revival of Let's Make a Deal on TV, I believe right now, being hosted by Wayne Brady. But originally, Monty Hall was the host of Let's Make a Deal. And the reason why this is named after him is because of all the wonderful prizes that people could come away with at the end of a game session or at the end of an episode of the game show. And this is probably one of the first RPG terms that I had ever learned that wasn't in one of the books, like just one of the I guess one of the memes of the hobby itself. A Monty Hall campaign being one where the money and loot is just given out willy-nilly. This would be an example of like a party that is 5th level having the paladin with a holy avenger and with some magical armor and as many magical items as they have space on their body to carry at a very low level, which the argument is that it unbalances the game because, hey, whenever you've got all of this very sweet magical gear, it throws off what little math there is for balancing encounters.
Well, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, on the DM side, you know, I think you can do either one of those intentionally and in a very fun way. I think the topic kind of implies when the DM isn't really doing it right, thus the Monty Hall reference kind of in a jokey, snarky way. I mean, whenever a party gets way out of balance with their level, when you just load them down with wealth and magical items, it becomes, and the main problem in my mind, and you guys tell me what you think, is really just it makes it very difficult for the DM to plan encounters that are challenging because it totally skews the challenge rating or however you want to think about it for other systems.
Yeah, my experience in it is that if it can even be as simple as giving one really powerful magic item to a party before it's really something that they have grown into. An example of this, I would say, would be whenever I ended up giving out a now I can't remember what it's called, but it's a Horn of Valhalla. That's what it's called, where one player character can blow this horn and it summons something like 2d6 combatants to fight on your side. This magic item makes pretty much any combat, at the level that these players had the item, the warriors that they summoned were higher level than the player characters themselves. So this was basically a we win this fight card that they could play.
Well, let's go into let's enumerate some of these, maybe from personal experience or from maybe games we ran or whatever. Like, what are the downsides to the Monty Hall first, and then maybe we should discuss what are the downsides of the mini-haul or the stingy haul game from the player and the DM perspective. I've already said the one with the challenge rating. What are some other challenges?
I think it's an interesting complaint from the player's perspective that they would chafe at getting too much gear. You wouldn't expect that necessarily at first glance, just doing kind of...
No, I agree completely.
Yeah, I've never heard a player complain about getting too much loot, but what I have seen is players get bored because there's not a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and the imbalance too. I mean, for me, those are the best parts of a game. Whenever you get your match, like say you get I can think of one game in particular where I was early on. I was given every party member was given something, but I remember getting a magical hammer of returning that it was just so special because it was the only getting a magic item feels awesome as a player, but whenever other players there's always that. Have you been in that game where one guy or gal gets that awesome weapon, and then everybody's looking at them like with jealousy, and then like looking back at the DM, and like it almost starts the countdown. It's like, well, where's mine? You know, that's another thing. When you start to hand out stuff, and not all magic items and not all loot is made equal, and inevitably, I've seen more often than not, you get like jealousy almost, or people getting mad. And then it creates this arms race in the party where the DM has to like feel almost. I've felt in many games I've ran like the players this silent pressure to like equal it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
it's very similar.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I interrupted you last time and kept talking.
I was just gonna say that. I think that's a natural thing that can come from a gear imbalance, or it could come from any kind of like bestowed power kind of imbalance just as easily. But one of the things about the Monty Hall Mini-Haul thing is that it sort of implies that if left alone, there's this like perfect equilibrium that the game system has in its natural state, and that a DM wanting to, overcompensate for their own inadequacies will, try to win over the party by just giving out presents, or, be some vindictive bastard by not giving out any toys or whatever, some presumably scheduled rate that would be optimal for gameplay. But I, for one, think that's giving way too much fucking credit to really any game system I've ever played. I think game systems themselves can be like a Monty Hall scenario, even without a DM tilting the balance one way or the other.
Yeah, I see the Monty Hall problem being very similar to the quote problem, where one player is very, very much optimized, whereas very much optimized far and away more than the other players. The difference here is that whenever a player is optimized, the player has made those decisions. In the Monty Hall situation, it is the DM who either intentionally or unintentionally has given one particular player such a massive advantage over comparably the other players. So the problem here lies in the source of the imbalance. And I've seen players get more jealous when the imbalance is due to the DM.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely been in those games where the party itself very quickly, if not off the jump, then we'll say, within the first couple sessions, have just lucked into tons of wealth, and it can really, I don't know, like on the player side, it's plenty of fun. Like it just adds resources. It adds, like when you go to places where you can actually spend, if it's like gold or loot or currency, I guess, I've never had a negative experience with it. Really come to think of it, yeah. Really, besides the the DM difficulty of balancing the game. What is the downside? Why not just give a player a really, good source of income and a great magic weapon as soon as possible? Like, why not?
This is not a good source of income and a magic item. This is something that is far and above that. This is giving them wealth far beyond what they should have earned by this particular level. This is when the game is balanced to each player having a +1 weapon and some +1 armor, where either one or multiple players in the party are walking around with +3 weapons, shields, armor, and necklaces, and capes, and boots, and all of these things that completely throw off the math of the game. I see this being a problem that DMs complain about, because it becomes incredibly, like, any advice given in the rule book on how to balance out an encounter is no longer applicable. And so the DM sees, the problem is this thing that I did is causing this imbalance in the game, and now I have to struggle in order to solve it.
That's how I see. Like, there are certain magic items that everybody I know has a story about the time when they used them. I'm thinking Deck of Many Things, Ring of Wishes, any of that stuff. There are just certain magic items that are famous in D&D that me as a DM would pretty much never give a party, because high level magic gear can just, not only can it it's one thing to have a really powerful sword or weapon. Combat is a mini game inside it's maybe the major game inside of our RPG, but sometimes you can give a magic item specifically. It seems like there's so much potential for it to derail the game altogether. You know what I mean? The magic item itself can quickly become the purpose of the game, and though that may not necessarily be a bad thing if it's more fun than what the players had been doing, but still, any DM who preps a narrative in some form or fashion is gonna have a hard time dealing with a magic item that all of a sudden becomes the main driver of a narrative, like the consequences of a wish, or these high level decks, like these high level unpredictable, anything that's a very unpredictable powerful magical items. I usually feel like they don't have much of a place in my games. Is that shitty of me?
I think so. I'm thinking about all the different times that I've seen a Deck of Many Things or a Ring of Wishes, or one of these like crazy things pop up, and unexpected shit happens. But I don't remember a time where it completely derailed the narrative or anything. Sometimes it'll add like weird shit that you didn't plan for, and that's fine. But I think when you write out stuff like that, you're taking away a pretty decent chunk of like the wonderful chaos that D&D can be. Everybody who's playing the game still has the same vested interest in the narrative going forward. It's not like anything's going to come out of the Deck of Many Things that says, all right, everybody dies and the universe explodes.
There isn't any card that does both of those things, but there is a card that, like, basically everybody, the player character either dies or, the player just has to fight death or die. And any other players who help them out, they also get a copy of death that they then have to fight and die, and can very quickly lead to a total party kill.
Yeah, that's epic as fuck. You probably wouldn't want to, toss something like that into your game willy-nilly, but if the group is prepped for like what's about to happen, and they get this thing and they understand like the gravity of this thing, whatever happens from there is what the fucking party wants to do. So cool.
Yeah, I wish that I could have that courage as a DM. Maybe that should be a goal of mine. It should be on my long-term DM growth plan to lighten up a little bit and just let the players have some wild experiences that are, unplanned.
I think a lot of those things really got a bad rap in like the early days, like first and second edition and stuff. because like stuff was much crazier back then. Every edition that comes out, I look at those iconic like major items and stuff, and it seems like they get a little bit nerfed more and more with every new edition. I mean, they're still huge, and like Clayton said, major stuff can happen, but like that was the style of stuff, and all the old like Gygax, Arneson stuff is just like wild ass shit going on. People fucking dying randomly and just jumping in with a new character. Or, oh, your character's, gender is changed or race is changed or whatever the fuck. Like everything was kind of up for grabs. And I think they've like reined that in a lot in recent editions.
Oh man, that could cause some 21st century conflicts. A card like that, change your gender. It's like, how many genders are my choices? So can we agree though that the Monty Hall getting too much is probably better than the Mini-Haul though in some? I think isn't it always better to err on the side of give too much versus too little? Or I mean, I guess the Monty Hall, as you have said multiple times, is just clearly over and above way too much, way too powerful. But if we scale it back a little bit, playing in a game where resources and magic items, they come real fast and real easy, versus the slog of playing this grindy, stingy game. Which one, I mean, in my mind, I would much rather play the Monty Hall versus the Mini-Haul.
I think D&D is absolutely built to be a Monty Hall game. Like, I think that is the balance point of D&D, and to say otherwise, it's just not recognizing it for what it is. Like, for example, and I think it's contextual based on what setting that you're in, but arguably the Forgotten Realms is the flagship setting for Dungeons and Dragons and has been since it took the reins from Greyhawk, back in the day. Arguably the iconic character of the Forgotten Realms would be Drizzt. That's the example of what, a character in full fruition would look like in Forgotten Realms. That's what you aspire to be. Drizzt's item list is ridiculous.
Pretty much everything he has is some crazy magical item.
It's insane, and it just shit that, like, it looks like you just got it from random rolls. Oh, I got this figurine that turns into a fucking panther. What? Yeah, sure, it's there. Alright, cool. All these fucking, like, cloaks and rings and swords and fucking every goddamn thing he has is just fucking great. And he's a fucking superhero in the Forgotten Realms, and that's exactly what D&D kind of assumes that you're trying to be. The whole damn thing's a power fantasy.
I am not a lover of the random magic chart. Should that be that's something I should definitely fix in my playing, no? Don't you think?
I think the Monty Hall problem comes mostly from the random loot charts, where you have a chance to roll a magical item every so often, and if you're very strictly adhering to just the rolls, it is going to happen just as a fluke that 9 out of 10 times when you only have a 10% chance of getting a magic item, it's going to happen sometimes that you roll to get a magic item every single time, and then whenever you go to roll which magic item you get, it's going to be one of the more powerful on the list. I mean, just the law of averages says that some people are going to have to deal with that.
Yeah, that's why I'm afraid of them.
How would you define, like, what would be the optimum running condition, though? Like, if you've got a party that lucked into a bunch of, like, really hot rolls for loot from the last adventure, and now, a couple of them are walking around with +3 weapons or whatever the fuck, why don't you just, give more hit points to your monsters or make their AC higher or whatever? Like, I don't understand, like, why it's so hard for a DM to deal with it.
It takes a lot of experience as being a GM in order to learn how to deal with those situations. I think that a lot of this problem comes from relatively new DMs who don't really have a firm grasp on how to balance out encounters and how to balance out things to account for the power level of the player characters. And these relatively inexperienced DMs giving out more loot than what would give a balanced encounter. And yeah, after you've had some experience under your belt and you can recognize, what actually is needed to balance out an encounter besides what's just written in the book, you kind of get through experience how many enemies of what power level the player characters can take at any particular time. I think that the Monty Hall problem, and to a lesser extent the Mini-Haul problem, are both problems that are a growing pain of becoming a better GM.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there.
Though I will say, I mean, in talking from my experience, that's like part of the way that I keep from happening is I do tend to micromanage in my GMing and don't ever use randomness. I use randomness as little as possible. And that can, but on the other hand, like Jordan was kind of describing, there's a certain, like in the games I've played that were very much like that, off the cuff, willing to, I think about it like this. It's like, you guys have played Fallout 4, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the funny things about it is that like, it's so big and there's so many things to do. The character wakes up and his son's been kidnapped and his goal is to go find him. And yet, level 40 comes and you haven't even finished the first quest because you've been doing other things. There's like no urgency to it at all. That's kind of a type of game that I think that would be fun to run, that lends itself to more of a randomness and could even cause a Monty Hall kind of situation where, if you having a very loose narrative that doesn't really have a lot of urgency, that allows the players the breathing room. There's not running a game where there's not some cursed item, that within 20 days is going to destroy the world, forcing the players to go on this like hard rail. Whereas if you give the players a chance to just go around and maybe do some random encounters, do some random rolls in dungeon stuff, that's a type of GMing that's so intimidating to me, but yet it would be so fun. Who wouldn't love to open a treasure box in a random dungeon and then, like, lo and behold, they pull out this crazy awesome weapon that everybody's jealous of. Like, those are the best moments as a player, right? I mean,
fuck yeah, dude. And honestly, that's how this game, I think, was originally designed to play. Like, you go back and look at it, all the like old original adventures, and it's just some random location with some self-contained shit going on in it. It's Keep on the Borderlands, it's fucking Elemental Evil, it's whatever the fuck, thing going on that's your dungeon of the week. And I think the assumption back then was that you're doing this big like exploration hex crawl thing across a continent and just accumulating wealth as you can. I don't know when the whole like Lord of the Rings like epic story arc thing became like the staple for every D&D campaign, but I don't know. I think I don't think it was built to be like that, or you'd see a different power curve and stuff.
Yeah, I think original D&D, like D&D in its original kind of ideal, was more Conan the Barbarian than Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
How does this apply to non-Wizards of the Coast games?
Well, most games that I play that aren't D&D, loot isn't, well, no, I take that back. Most of the games I play that aren't D&D, loot isn't a big deal, except for Traveler, where loot is pretty much everything. Loot is how you advance your character.
Man, shout out to the Dune Modifius game. I guess we can say shout out because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. That's one of the things that really has me vexed, is that a major mechanical part of the game, a core element of the game, are called the parts called your assets. And like the assets that you choose can be social, or they can be but they're also your equipment. And so in the game you start out with 3, I believe. And one has to be a material object. So it could be a crysknife, it could be a Gom Jabbar, but it could even be like an ornithopter or some armor or something like that. And in that kind of a system, it would be like just reading through the book, it all seems like it could easily be get very Monty Hall real quick, because you could have like a squad of soldiers could be your asset. You could have a ship, you could have these big ticket items, which to me blows me away because it seems like it would get out of hand really quick. But so I don't really know how that contributes to this at all, but like there are some games out there who really take a very different approach to equipment altogether that can be pretty interesting, to where you can get your big ticket item as a part of your character creation. It's kind of weird.
Here's what I see as the core problem to Monty Hall problems, even for people who are experienced GMs who are dealing with the issue. Once you give out the fucking awesome, cool loot, how do you top yourself the next time loot is given out?
Rust monsters.
How do you get players excited the next time they get their loot and it's, oh, I get another +3 weapon? Awesome. Thanks. I'll just put this in my sheath, or for whenever my Holy Avenger is no longer available to me. That's
a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to that. I feel like, to me, if as a player, going back to that hammer, I remember this game, I think, ran till maybe 12th level-ish, and it got very epic. It had more of a Lord of the Rings style narrative to it. We were all on a big fellowship quest. But I got that hammer super early, and I always thought it was a really good trick that the DM did, is that what he did was he made it just a hammer of returning, I think is what it was. It was just it was my preferred weapon. I think it was a mace, actually. It was my character's preferred type of weapon, and it had that cool magical quality. And what he did, and initially it wasn't too broken. It was really useful, and I had a lot of pride in it as a player, but all the players had something like it. And what he would do is as time went on, he would unlock more ability. So instead of like, say, rolling on a random encounter chart or whatever, or a random magic chart and giving you another item, as we got, more down the road, he would give more qualities to the weapon you already had. And that was really cool. But another thought on that topic was, at a certain point, if you just get gifted either through the DM or random roll a really nice item, like, to me, you cannot complain about that, right? Like, I don't really, as a player who had a really precious magic item in the past, I held onto that thing with dear life, and I didn't care if I got another thing ever again. Like, I might want some complimentary things, but like, I never felt shortchanged because I didn't get a better one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I really like when stuff happens, like you mentioned, where you get a magic item that grows with you, and so it becomes like part of your character story. That's super interesting, and it's not just another fucking piece of gear that you're gonna sell for the next +1 at the next town.
Yeah, and Jordan, you hinted at something that I think of is a solution to a Monty Hall problem. And whenever you said that, like, whenever maybe the magic item becomes a big part of the campaign itself because it is such a powerful item, like using that for the adventure and against the players. Like, okay, yes, they have this assortment of incredibly powerful magical items. You know who doesn't have this very powerful assortment of magical items? People who are more powerful than you and want those items.
Maybe not even more powerful. Maybe just people who are fucking desperate. Like, if it gets out that you're walking around with a inestimably powerful and valuable sword and you're just rocking it on your hip, you leave town, how is every fucking, like, every would-be road bandit and anyone who's got some kind of desperation in their life that would cause them to rise to the occasion not going to be waiting around the bend, 2 miles out of town? Like, you'd be mobbed, like.
Oh man, that's an idea for an amazing game. I think about, like, all these, like, these days, museums have a lot of pressure. I was reading the other day about, like, I think about Rome, right? This is a weird segue, but this is a weird fact about the city of Rome. There are more standing ancient Egyptian obelisks in Rome, just the city of Rome, than there are in Egypt.
Whoa.
Because they got looted, right? Mm-hmm. And so imagine a game in the future where like the party stumbles upon this really like nice magic item, but it's like a cultural item, right? And so they're like getting hunted down by a wizard who like creates magic items, or a culture that, you know, is trying to seek their lost heritage or whatever. And like the whole, like for the entirety of the game, there's this subplot. And it might even be the overt plot that like they're trying to protect their hoard of magic items from the people they stole them from or claim to be their original owners. That'd be a good game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of the key of making it work is keeping it from being just a magic item that the player characters have in their possession. Make sure that there is some sort of story behind it. Like, these powerful items are going to be storied items. They're going to have been a part of history and have probably shaped history. So incorporating that history into the game, incorporating those stories, is only going to enrich the story that you have. If you can get the player characters to see this assortment of Monty Hall items that they have picked up as more than just the +3 weapons that they've got, the armor that they've got, making it more than just a stat on their sheet. Because once the players write a stat on their sheet like that, if there's nothing special about it, it's just going to be one more thing that's on the character sheet, and it's not going to mean anything.
And that's just great advice in general, I think, for anybody listening who is just trying to come up with a game, or maybe struggling to create content, is that it's easy to create more, like to create quantity of, and this is me from personal experience. I'm the type of person that I want to always get to the next plot point. I think about it in a very narrative way. So I'm always trying to get the players to the next, social encounter, I guess, and those like fights and whatever. Those are ways to get over to that next point. But like, it's just as meaningful, and it probably is more meaningful, and I dare it's probably a lot easier to think more in terms of depth. It's like, instead of thinking about what new, unique idea I can bring into the game, it's like, how can I make the story more depth? Give it more depth, because so many times in games, magic items are just magic items. I mean, they're just, yeah, there's magic items in the world. You got one, congratulations, it's pretty, and you don't really go much into that. You could create sessions and sessions worth of subplots just by doing that, creating storylines connected to items that they could have even gotten in random games. It could be a mundane item, but it could be a Monty Hall item, and it should be. If you choose to give your players a Monty Hall item, you could really build a huge chunk of the story around that, because by definition it should be super rare and super it shouldn't just be a small thing that someone finds an ancient sword that's even +2 for something, or if it's a flaming weapon or whatever. Those types of things should be, there should be some sort of depth that you can bring into the game that way.
Yeah, that's not a +3 longsword. That's fucking Narsil. Your ancestor used that to cut the ring off Sauron's finger. That thing matters. Yeah, I agree. Another thing I want to bring up about loot in D&D is that I think that part of the problem with Monty Hall stuff is that they, for whatever reason, designed most of the magic items to be unqualified benefits to the character who has them. There's the cursed items as a counterpoint, but I think that it would be much more interesting and solve a lot more of those kind of problems if more magic items were some kind of trade-off. If you were, if it was kind of hurting or costing something of the character to use it, as well as the benefit, and play around with the devil's bargain more. But yeah, when everything is just another +1 to something, of course you're going to try to stack as many +1s on top of yourself as you can.
Yeah, can we have a talk about cursed or intelligent items for a second? Because they're very Monty Hall-ish.
Let's do it.
Well, how do you guys feel about them?
Well, whenever I am the DM, I always forget that the sword is intelligent and is empathic and is able to telepathically communicate with its wielder. And as I'm running everything else that is a part of the game, I forget that the sword absolutely hates orcs and is going to flip out every time there is an orc around and try to convince its wielder to attack the orc on sight. I forget that whenever I'm the DM.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think that should be the Dungeon Master's responsibility. I think if you get an intelligent item like that, the DM should tell you what its personality and its goals and stuff are, and then I think you should take it on yourself, just like if you had some kind of follower or retainer or whatever that you would control and do all that, or a pet. It's a very similar kind of thing. My problem with them is, at least in the ones that I've looked at, which is, I guess, all of them, they're kind of samey. The intelligent ones, I mean, like, there's one or two for each kind of like major thing. There's the Stormbringer analog. There's like the good version of that. There's like sort of a balanced one in between. They're kind of boring, and the cursed items are a little bit more interesting, but just like the deck of many things and some of the other wacky stuff that D&D has, I think a lot of that shit has been super nerfed in the last couple of editions.
I mean, yeah, I had one in the last game that I gave to, I believe, can't remember, Gruben. I think had one that I had envisioned I was gonna you make a little mischief with that it was an intelligent item and it was evil, and I remember it had a lot of it had the urge to violence, was how I imagined it. And for a couple sessions I really played it up, but like inevitably it almost became this like tug of war between the player and the DM. It's like, because unless you straight up take it down to a random roll of whether you can. And I was just looking up the sanity rule, sub-rules to Roll20, and I think that introducing some sort of willpower mechanic is important when you do that, because if you just give your player the choice to, you've got this sword really wants blood, it really wants to fight these guys, don't talk to them, it wants you to attack them. The player inevitably is like, if the situation's not right for it, they're like, but I'm not going to do that. No, I'm just going to resist it. Okay. And then you get into the situation where you're like, okay, do I have to make my player roll a willpower check or whatever every time they get into this? Especially if, like you said with orcs, that would even be a little more manageable because you might not run into orcs or you can control the orcs. But some of them have very, inconvenient urges, and I don't know, it seems like that could bother me as a player too. I like your idea, Jordan, of giving it to the player, but that's, once again, you're relying on, it's tough to rely on a player to do things that's not going to be advantageous to the party in bad situations. It takes a special role player who can pull that off socially in the game, but also do it and be honest to the to the character and the item. Usually they're just like, I'll use it when it's useful and I'll forget that I had it when I don't.
One way that you could handle the intelligent item or something like that would be taking a note from either the game Monsters and Other Childish Things or from Geist, the Sin Eaters from World of Darkness, where another player is the one who is in control over what that thing does and says to the player who wields it. I could see that being a very good tool, and you can then reward the player who is who has control over the item, who is saying all of the things into the ear of the character who has the magic item. You can find a way of giving some sort of in-game benefit, like if you're playing Savage Worlds, a Benny or a fate point or inspiration in D&D, something like that, to to reward the player for doing a good job of portraying this item that another player is wielding.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
Why not?
Have you played in a game like that, or just read about it?
You mean with a player playing and basically an NPC item? Yeah, I've been a player in that game, or I was a player in a game that did that. I think it worked really well because me and the player who was controlling my sword was just constantly like just kind of tapping me on the arm and just whispering things at me that my sword was saying to me.
My first thought would be almost kind of like still the same problem that, say there was an item that would influence you to go in a way that would disadvantage the party, even if it was controlled by a third party other player. You'd have to delegate it to I don't know. It just seems weird. Maybe that's the DM control freak in me. It makes me feel like even that player would only remember that responsibility when it would benefit the party. You know what I mean? But maybe not.
Ellie, sometimes, man, you sound like you've been traumatized from some groups that you have run games for. Like, you have got a marked, what's the word I want to use? Suspicion, I guess. Like, you don't seem to want to trust the group at all. It's the school teacher in you?
I think it's probably the school teacher in me. And yes, I have had a couple of those situations where, like, not to go into any details, because somebody on this podcast definitely was not involved in any of these types of games. But there was a time in my role playing career where, as a player, I thought that it was an adversarial role, and I know that there was a time when we all kind of thought that the DM was versus the players, right? And I think that's common in younger players, or just maybe there are certain cultures of gamers too. I mean, we all know those guys. There are people who play D&D who have completely different ways of looking at things, and they want to get over on the DM, and the DM wants to get over on them. And I've had a couple of games where things have not gone my way as the DM. You know what I mean? But, that's more of a lack on my side, I think, of the DM, because once again, it's the DM's job is to give a story and to arbitrate what goes on in the party. But at the end of the day, not every DM realizes that the player's fun is the ultimate goal. And, I guess I'm leaning more on that side. And I've made that comment a couple of times on the podcast. It's like, I do feel like the DM is the most important player because they put more work in. And so, like, if the DM has something to say or something they want to do, to a certain point, it's on the players to want to follow that rabbit hole. I mean, but only if it's fun, right?
Yeah. I think the important thing.
That's why
I don't want to derail all this, but I just want to say in response to what you just said, the way I think about it is that it is a antagonistic role, but it's a pretend antagonistic role. Like I think about when I'm running a game, I feel like I'm wrestling with my little cousins. Like obviously the DM could just wipe the party anytime he wanted to because he controls the whole context where everything happens. But the fun of it is simulating enough resistance for the other combatants who are just dramatically weaker to feel like there's some drama, some back and forth, some ups and downs, and that, in the end they actually accomplish something. Like, I don't know. That's all I had to say about that.
There are some players, though, who don't recognize that. They don't recognize that the DM is trying to do those things. They only see the game they only see the game master as this person who is here to try to mess me up and try to mess up what I am here to do and what my character wants. The DM is only here to mess that up. Mm-hmm. And I want to contrast that with a trend that I've been seeing most markedly in the last 10 years is just the number of players who play the game and recognize that the DM is there to facilitate the fun by throwing challenges, and the player contributes to the challenges that they experience and that the other players experience. I see that as being a trend over basically the past 10 years of there being more players who recognize that this game is not an adversarial game.
I mean, what's the old adage, right? When you give a guy a Vorpal sword, every problem looks like a neck that needs to be decapitated. Is that how it goes?
Something like that. Yeah. We didn't talk much about the mini-haul thing. Can we talk about that a little bit before we wrap up? I know we're starting to get kind of long, but I'd like to touch on what it's like to be in a game completely deprived of magic items, if we can. Is that all right, Clayton?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the Mini-Haul campaign, that is what I ran the first few years when I was DM. I had read too much online about the Monty Hall problem, and I was incredibly reticent to give out loot. I was reticent to give out coinage, magic items, and it got to the point where it was unbalancing for the players, where they were going into combats in 3rd edition D&D, they were going into combats at 7th or 8th level, and they didn't have enough magic items in order to beat the resistances of all of the monsters that they were fighting, or they didn't have the proper things that they needed in order to get through an encounter. That was a problem that I had probably my first 3 or 4 years when I was a DM. And it took a lot of effort on my part in order to break myself of that habit. To break myself, I'm still too stingy with coinage. I still don't give out nearly as many coins as I probably should, because I've heard complaints from my players, and I see it whenever they go to buy stuff of, well, I would like to get this thing, but I just don't have enough coin for it. And sometimes it's even for mundane gear. They'll get to a point and they're like, well, we don't have, this would have been in 3rd edition. We don't have 50 feet of rope because I didn't have enough to buy it at character creation. And now we're level 4, and I haven't been to a shop when I had enough money to buy rope.
I mean, they're the worst.
What?
I mean, I don't have a lot to say. I would much rather err on the side of giving too much than giving too little, but a DM that's actively, I don't know. I mean, it also depends on the campaign. I mean, that can be fun whenever everybody knows that going into it from the beginning. If you say I wanted to create like a real grindy, low-tech, low resource-driven game, then as long as, I guess, poverty is a part of the gameplay, having to survive, I guess, I could see that being fun. But I mean, to just go into dungeons and all you're getting is, I don't know, like sunstones or like simple potions of magic and like some copper in every single one of your kit, every single loot that you find. That's like, at that point you're just like, yawn.
Yeah, it's like, why isn't my character just like running a shop somewhere or like farming something? Like, why am I risking my life?
Right.
Yeah, there is a setting where there is a place for that, and that setting is called Dark Sun. If you're not playing in Dark Sun and you realize that you are running a Mini-Haul campaign, the solution is very easy. You drop a treasure hoard on the player characters.
Clayton, you are very stingy with treasure, I can say, like to this day. That's a thing that I expect anytime I sit down for a Clayton game. It's like, oh man, better pinch pennies, unless he's got a wild hair and we're doing something experimental with robes of many things. If this is a regular campaign
from that experience. I don't think that you did much to sway him in that instance. Clayton, you want to revisit that personal nightmare for context?
I'm pretty sure we've talked about it on the podcast, but for our listeners to hear it again, I had customized the item creation rules a little bit for an Eberron game we were playing, and Jordan realized that through the rules that I had presented and the abundance of magical crafters that were available in the city of Sharn in Eberron, Jordan realized he had the capacity to make robes of useful items for cheaper than what the resulting items were going to be worth. And he just decided to hire out literally every craftsman in the city who was capable of making them in order to create an income for himself.
He's an industrialist, man. He's flipping robes.
I mean, but that is something that you need. That is a good example of what could be a Monty Hall moment in a game that could be completely, that can be destabilizing in a game that people need to watch out for. That, anything. You have to also think about, like, especially magic items that aren't necessarily weapons, like, can these be exploited monetarily to gain, just like in a video game, there's always that hack that you can, go find that one trader that makes you the endless good deal. You know what I mean? That's definitely a possible outcome. It's like, yeah, you could it's one thing to have a player that has, like, a Vorpal sword, say, or some crazy weapon, and that's bad enough as a DM, but I think the combat implications are one thing, but, like, some of these items are so wealthy or so valuable, why would your character could, like, trade it for, like, just a treasure trove, could trade it for ownership of a town, you know what I mean? Like, some of these items are so valuable, they could even turn those items into something that you could completely change the nature of your game. So that's another thing that Jordan figured out with that, but I mean, I think that you could run into that problem with a lot of high-level magical items. I mean, why not trade a wish ring? I could trade a ring of wish. I could make a wish, or I could just take it to, like, a king of a kingdom. He could make me, like, a really wealthy lord, because why wouldn't he want a ring of wishes, right? Look at what Jafar did.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to let magic be something that can be purchased. I think that's just, like, asking for trouble. Full stop.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I agreed before you abused the system to show me the error of my ways.
Man, it's just bad 5e design. Like, anybody could have done it. On average, the robe is worth more than what you paid for it. It's just fucking stupid. But I just want to circle back real quick to the Monty Hall thing, or the Mini-Haul thing. Depending on what level you are, like, especially at low level, this is a really big deal. If your party is unable to produce magical damage of a sufficient quantity to kill certain things that you might encounter at that level, you might get a complete total party kill from something as simple as, like, a specter. Like, there's a couple different undead that, unless you've got some way to do a bunch of magic damage, they're just going to be completely immune to everything and just kill your whole fucking group. That's not as big of a problem since you've got things like Firebolt and, like, some of the magic dealing cantrips, but that's dependent on your party just happening to be spec'd out that way. I think that's, like, just to go off the thing you were talking about prior, Clayton, like, it kind of scales all the way up. I mean, if you've got a troll and you don't have some kind of fire spell or fire sword or something like that, you might get wiped. I don't know. The game assumes that your characters are spec'd out to some degree.
I think running, like, I think there is a little magic in good DM design if you kind of, I think in terms of, like, if we're D&Ding, because we always talk about D&D, but in any game, like, the first 4 or 5 sessions, we'll call it, maybe the first 4 or 5 levels, it should be a little sparse, if only to make those initial magic items that you do give them feel so special, right? Magic items are definitely important in a game, and you want to give them out. You need to be thoughtful about which ones you give, and they need to be appropriate level, but you have, I mean, at a certain point, like Jordan was saying, it's like, why the hell am I adventuring if not to get rich or die trying, right? And at a certain point, if they don't die trying, but they're still not getting rich, that's not going to be fun unless you have some other super engaging part of your game. But still, players deserve those payoffs. But giving it too early, it lowers, like you were saying, Clayton, it lowers the value of them. It makes them like, ho hum. It's like, oh shit, I got something like that in the second session. Big deal, you know.
I know exactly why I edged toward doing a mini-haul campaign is because of those low levels. They go by so quickly. And as the DM, I'm thinking, well, hell, I just gave a magic item out to them, 2 sessions ago. That's my mindset. And then if one of my players told me, oh, hey, that was last level that you gave us a new magic item and we're gaining a new level at the end of this session and we haven't been, compensated enough for the amount of experience that we have gotten to have as much loot as we should. That's where I run into my problem. It's just where the low levels seem like they go by so much quicker. And I have this block in my mind that magic items need to be rare. They need to be special. I equate them being special with being given out less often. And I know it's a fallacy of mine, and I'm struggling to beat it. And I'm very sorry that I haven't beaten it yet.
If I could, I'd like to propose a system that I think would be a pretty balanced way of approaching magic item distribution. And you guys tell me what you think. And it's based off of what Eliot did with his last campaign in Ravenloft, and I've seen the versions of this done before, but I really like the idea of a wish list that players create, probably early on, of magic items that will complement their character, because if you just go by random rolls, inevitably you're going to get some stupid shit like the rogue randomly rolls a Helm of Brilliance. It's like, what the fuck am I going to do with this? This is just for a completely different kind of person than who I am. And then you get into like the magic trading and, bartering economy, and you're back to the same problem. But if you've got intentional magic items that maybe the player doesn't know when they're coming or in what order that they're coming, but they're already at power tiers of common, uncommon, so on. You create like a customized random list for each player, and you give them out in that milestone kind of way that we as a group at least seem to have gotten pretty accustomed to for character leveling as well. So like everybody's kind of got their own personalized magic item list that's still got a random element to it that grows with them over time. Does that seem like the best way to go? Do you guys have thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can give you the other side of that experience because I'm glad I did that, and I'm glad you appreciated it. The one thing that I would do differently, or I would do it a little differently this time though, it was pretty low level, say 5th, 6th-ish, I think, when I asked for the list. And I had 2 experiences. Certain players gave an itemized list that they clearly took an evening to do and put a lot of thought into it, and it was great. And then you had other players who struggled to give me anything. And so I think, inevitably I felt like I was letting down the players who made really good, concise lists and put in that work. I felt an obligation to give them those things. But there were so many, it was like, anyway. But then I had to basically create that list for others, which is fine. That's easy. You just do random rolls or whatever. But I think what I would do next time is I would do that in segments. I would like almost ask your players, or I would ask my players, like, what is like the one ultimate magic item for your character? Maybe right off the bat. What weapons could you see, or items would you see your character working their whole career to get, would be the big ticket item? And just ask for one of those. And then every couple of levels say, now give me like 2 items that you think your character would really like to have over the next 3 levels, or kind of like almost make it a smaller bits. I would add a lot. I would do it more granular. That way I, as the DM, wouldn't be overloaded. And plus, if you ask for something, in May and you're still running the game in August, you may not even remember what was on that list, or, you know what I mean? So asking for more concise, smaller chunks, I think is good, just to make sure that the players, aren't building up these huge lists and then not getting most of it, but also to keep it in the front of your mind, but.
I would add to what Eliot said. My criticism follows very similar to what Eliot said, but I'm going to phrase it a slightly different way. And I'm going to be a little bit sarcastic when I say it. It's the system falls apart when it comes to the filthy casuals who play D&D, the people who only care about the game whenever the game starts, and they stop thinking about it when the game ends, and they don't give it any more thought throughout the week. Those people will not come up with a list of magic items that they want. So there's always going to be somebody in the group who is like that. There's usually going to be more than one in the group who is like that. And having the players come up with lists, yeah, that's a great idea. And if you've got players who are invested in it, that does solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem when not everyone is invested enough in order to find an item that they are going to want for their character.
Yeah, I was just thinking about requiring it as like one of those steps of character creation. And maybe your character doesn't even know like that those things exist. Maybe that's like a meta game kind of activity or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, noobs don't have noobs may not know what they can get.
Right. And I also wanted to say something about consumable magic items here. I think it's really cool to be pretty liberal with like potions and scrolls and shit that has a finite number of charges, stuff like that. I think those things are super fun and are exactly the types of things that belong on like random loot lists and stuff. It's the things that are like clearly permanent, like almost relic level items that you probably don't want to just hand out and just happen to have come across in a random chest in a dungeon someplace, unless it was like intended to be there.
Yeah, I 100% would agree with you, Jordan. However, I am also the player who, whenever I get to the end of a Final Fantasy game, I have 99 or 999, whatever the max is, number of mega elixirs, because I'm holding on to them until the point where I really need them.
Well, this is definitely getting a bit far afield, but how does the game, like, what do you think about giving your players, instead of giving your players an avenue to request from you, the DM, certain things, is there any system that pulls off well giving the players the ability to create those things themselves and letting it be a mini game? It's like, now it's like, I guess, yeah, I mean, you guys understand.
The D&D
doesn't do it well.
It's been garbage in every version of D&D I've seen. I don't know if there's a system that does it well. Clayton, do you know one?
Nothing comes to mind. As far as something that has a lot of rules in it, I know that I really liked the World of Darkness werewolf stuff for making like totems and stuff, as they involved like actually going out and binding spirits to an item in order to make it a magic item. And I'm pretty sure that the mage system had something similar for magic items in there.
You just jarred my memory. I take that back completely. Fucking Stormbringer had an awesome magic item creation system. Where you would do just that. You would find demons or like summon demons or elementals, and you would bind them into weapons and armor and whatever. And, demons would give you a lot of like really random kinds of powers that, like you wouldn't know exactly what you were getting. You would just get like X number of power kind of demon that could do all kinds of different things in your sword. Or whatever it is. The other stuff was a little more predictable. Like, maybe a air elemental would deflect arrows or, something like that. The Stormbringer games have had a really fucking kick-ass magic creation system, magic item creation system, almost like Pokemon. You go like hunting for these things and then turn them into magic items. And if they escaped, that was a really fucking cool thing that D&D never does. If your demon sword like breaks or something, or if you fuck up the ritual to bind the demon to the weapon or armor or whatever, that thing's still there and it's just going to fucking tear your head off. Or if you've got like a fire sword and a ice sword that cross each other, they're going to negate each other and explode. There's all kinds of like cool shit like that. Yeah, I'm going with Stormbringer for that pick.
Because that seems like, to go back to the video game thing, I've been playing a lot of, I won't reveal my geek things. I've been playing survival games lately, and I've been playing Fallout 4 again. And like there's always this back and forth I really enjoy that I think lends itself to being adopted to D&D, but I've never seen it done. That like the way that I play those games is that I'll go quest for a while and pursue whatever story thing I'm wanting to do, but then I'm gonna get tired of the grind like you do in I think in D&D or role-playing games. It simulates kind of like that downtime people always want to take. Once you've gone on a long quest, you kind of want a little downtime to recenter and spend your loot or whatever. And like it would be in like Fallout, I always take breaks by building up I like that part of the game, the mini game where you can build your camps, and I'll spend days and days and hours and hours and hours in the game just building my camp, and that leads to more quests to go get certain junk just to come back and finish like a turret or something like that. That could be a real driver in a game it's one thing to find a random magic item or to quest for it, even if you're like, oh, the sword's over in that tomb, let's go get it. But like to like make a part of the story just you collecting the items to create it yourself, to me that would be an easy game to make, and I think the players would really dig it.
Agreed. I would dig that.
I tried to do something similar to that in a campaign not too awfully long ago. I let the players know that that basically they could harvest parts off of monsters and use those parts to make magic items that were in somehow related to it. Like, for instance, harvest the eyes off of a creature with dark vision in order to make goggles of night or something like that. I was hoping that there was going to be a point in the campaign where the players realized, you know what, we could hunt certain monsters in order to get certain magic items that we want. Unfortunately, the campaign never got to that point. It was always just, well, let's see what we can make from the monsters that we killed in the course of this one quest that we've already completed.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it would have, there's other problems for the DM too. You just kind of create it, but you're on the spot to make recipes for these items, which are not given usually in games. I could see there being a lot of work for the DM to still do to support a game like that, but I don't know, seems fun.
I think it'd be really fun, especially if you had that list. I've seen like things like that on random people's websites. Nothing like official or anything, but going back years and years, like cool recipes for potions and whatever.
The potions are the ones that make me want to do stuff like that too, because as a DM, one of I guess a little pet peeve, but it's nothing against any players, it's just pet peeve for the systems themselves, is that there's no really great mechanism for making them. And, to me, I don't know, I'm kind of like you, Jordan, or maybe it was Clayton that said this. I just don't think magic items should just be purchased like a commodity. I think that there's something that cheapens it a little bit. But then you just are in the position of like, like you're having to constantly, roll, oh, well, you found a magic potion in this random box. It's like, oh, you killed a goblin that has 3 magic potions. You're just constantly having to feed your players these. And if you don't, they get pissed. So it ended up always just devolves into, fuck it, you can just go buy one. I would love to be able to just be like, no, you gotta fucking make your own, and now you manage it in this mini game, and there you go.
I also think that there should probably be more ways that magic items can be destroyed. Like, that's the whole reason that they came up with the rust monster, is to like counterbalance the Monty Hall tendencies of things. But like, it's pretty hard to do with a dispel magic spell. And I don't know, I just think that there should be some risk involved if you're gonna pull out some really powerful magic item to deal with a threat. Like, it, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're putting a big asset out there into play. It'd be like going to war with the fucking Mona Lisa. You know what I mean? Like, there's something unique here that you're using, and you know, it's a big target. Like, if I'm a fucking wizard, some evil wizard fighting a group of pretty well stocked player characters, depending on what the item is, it might make more sense for me to try to destroy a magic item than to destroy the person wielding the magic item. So, I don't know.
I will say that one of the few things that I really liked about 4th edition D&D was you had the capacity to break down a magic item that you no longer needed in order to basically gain the magical essence of it, and then use that in order to craft a new magic item.
Personally, I hated that system.
Yeah, I didn't play 4th enough to really develop a taste or distaste for it.
Well, we're starting to run a little bit long. You comfortable with going on to geek things?
For sure.
Yep.
All right. I've got just one. Well, yeah, I've just got one geek thing I'm going to do. I've been watching a YouTube series called Cinema Therapy. It is a licensed therapist and a filmmaker examining movies. They either look at the movies or they look at particular characters and do basically a psychological workup of the characters that are in it. They've got a series where the therapist advises what type of therapy would work best for like certain villains, and I've been getting a big kick out of watching that series. So Cinema Therapy is my geek thing for this week.
I've got a couple. I'll try to make it as short as possible. First of all, I'm playing this game called The Forest. It's on all platforms. It's really fun. Crash on a desert island. Next thing you know, you're trying to, build up a base and survive on an island full of cannibals. It's a lot of fun. But I really want to talk about something I read about recently. An album by the Wu-Tang Clan called Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. Have you guys heard of this album?
Yes.
Is this an unreleased, like, super rare album?
Yeah, so they worked on it for over 10 years. The idea behind it was that they wanted to simulate how, instead of being it just overly commercialized and, see how many albums you can sell, they wanted to make a singular piece of art. And so they recorded over this long period of time. They only pressed one copy of the album, and then they encased it in this ornate golden box with this. It's just this cool looking object, and then it's a part of the ownership, and buying and gaining ownership comes along with a contractual obligation to not reproduce it under the huge penalty or whatever. You get your ass sued off to make sure that it only stays by one copy. So they released it, I can't remember, I think 2016, 17 or whatever, they released it for sale, they auctioned it, and it was purchased for over $1 million. But weirdly enough, the story goes even stranger. It was the guy who bought it was the now disgraced pharmaceutical CEO, Martin Shkreli. If you're not familiar with this guy, he's the guy who got infamous by becoming the CEO of this pharmaceutical company that makes insulin and just jacked the price way up. And he ended up losing. He went to jail for all kinds of shit.
The dude's a total piece of shit.
Yeah, and when they seized his assets, that album was one of the things they seized, and they had to resell it. And so there's this. I'm not going to go into all the details. There was an article written about it. I wish I had thought about that first, but it's on Wikipedia. And so it even put the Wu-Tang Clan in this weird position where they had to distance themselves from him and the selling of the object. They donated the money they got from it once he was disgraced and all this stuff. So now it's in this weird limbo where nobody really knows what to do with this thing. And it's okay. He paid $2 million for it, but it's just a really interesting story. And I just like the idea of music being done in a completely different way and released in a different way. It's kind of neat.
I got one. It is It is called wormhole.app, A-P-P. It's this website, and there's also an Android app for it, and it's super simple. What it does is it lets you send a file or files up to 10 gigabytes at a time, and it's end-to-end encrypted, and you just go to the thing in your browser, like select your files. It gives you a link that you can then send to whoever, and they can download whatever your thing is for up to 24 hours, and then it disappears completely, and nobody except you and the recipient that you send it to ever gets to see what those files are. And it's completely free. You can use it, an unlimited amount of times. It's just kind of amazing. I'm going to be sending my 1/3 of the recording of this to Clayton over Wormhole as soon as we conclude. So yeah, check it out. It's pretty sweet.
All right, guys. Well, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Let's do it.
Okay.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.